May 2002. Crofton, Maryland. A man in waders stands at the edge of a small pond behind a strip mall, and he is about to poison everything in it. Not part of it, all of it. The crew pumps in herbicide first, to strip the water of oxygen-giving plants. Then comes the rotenone, a chemical that shuts down the gills of every breathing thing in that pond. Within hours, the surface turns silver with the bellies of dying fish. Bluegill, bass, carp. Hundreds of them, floating up, twitching, gone. All of it to kill one fish. A fish that, a few weeks earlier, an angler had pulled out of that very pond and photographed because he had never seen anything like it. A long, mottled, snake-headed thing with a mouth full of teeth and a body that would not stop moving even when it was out of the water. The northern snakehead, Channa argus. A predator from the rivers of China and Korea that can breathe air, slither across wet land, and survive out of water for days. And here is the part that should stop you. That pond was just the beginning. That single poisoning was the opening shot in a war that, by the most cited estimates, would cost the United States somewhere in the neighborhood of $520 million. Surveys, electrofishing boats, bounty programs, eradication crews, decades of federal and state money poured into stopping a fish the newspapers were already calling the Frankenfish. The stakes were enormous. The snakehead lays tens of thousands of eggs at a time. It guards its young like a soldier. It eats almost anything smaller than itself. And it had just arrived in the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, one of the most important fisheries on the entire eastern seaboard. Biologists looked at the math and they were terrified. A breeding population of air-breathing super predators, loose in a river system worth billions, with no natural enemy on this continent to stop it. So we spent, and we spent, and we fought that fish with poison and nets and electricity for the better part of 2 decades. That's not what saved the Potomac. What saved it was already living in the river. 2 ordinary native fish. Fish you have probably caught, or eaten, or walked right past on a dock without a second thought. They did, quietly, for nothing, what $500 million could not. I'm Edmund Hale, and this is the full story of how a feared invader took over an American river. How the largest, most expensive containment effort missed the answer that was swimming right under the boats, and what the data now reveals about who really won. Before I go further, let me take something out of your head. Because I know what you're picturing. You're picturing a wipeout. You're picturing the snakehead doing to the Potomac what the lionfish did to the Caribbean reefs, or what the Asian carp did to the Mississippi. Empty water, native fish gone, a river ruined. It's not the one you're picturing. What actually happened in the Potomac is stranger and quieter and a great deal more humbling than a horror story, because the snakehead did spread. It is still there. You can catch one this weekend. And yet, the collapse that everyone braced for, the one that justified all that money, never came. There is a hole in the official story. A gap between what we were told would happen and what the fish surveys actually recorded year after year. And inside that gap is an uncomfortable truth about how much of our money and our effort was spent fighting a battle that 2 native fish had already taken into their own hands. Let me show you. Start with the fear, because the fear was real and it was earned. When that first breeding population turned up in the Crofton Pond in 2002, the people whose job it was to understand fish did not panic for no reason. They panicked because they knew exactly what this animal could do. The northern snakehead is built like a weapon. It can grow past 3 feet long. Its jaw is lined with teeth, and behind that jaw sits a primitive air-breathing organ, a kind of crude lung that lets it gulp oxygen straight from the atmosphere. That single adaptation changes everything. A normal fish, you can suffocate. You can drain the oxygen from the water and it dies. The snakehead just rises to the surface and breathes. It means the snakehead can live in warm, stagnant, low oxygen backwaters where most predators can't follow. It means it can survive being hauled up in a bucket tossed on a bank, even left in the bottom of a boat for hours. There are documented accounts of these fish wriggling overland across wet ground from one body of water to the next. Slowly, yes. Awkwardly, yes. But they do it. And then there's the breeding. A single female northern snakehead can release somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 eggs in a season, and she can spawn more than once a year in the right conditions. The parents don't scatter those eggs and abandon them either. They build a nest, they hover over it, and they ferociously defend the cloud of young that hatches. Both parents stand guard. They will charge anything that approaches. That parental defense means a far higher share of those young survive than you'd expect from a fish. So picture the threat as the biologists did in 2002, an air-breathing predator. Tens of thousands of well-guarded, young, a fish that can colonize water, nothing else can, and walk to the next pond if it has to. Now, release that into the freshwater rivers feeding the Chesapeake Bay, an estuary that supports a seafood industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year and tens of thousands of jobs. The official response was swift and absolute. Poison the Crofton Pond. Kill everything. Make it a wasteland and start over. And for that one pond, the strategy worked. The snakeheads there died with everything else. But it was already too late, and they suspected as much. Because in 2004, the snakehead turned up in the Potomac River itself, not a contained pond you can poison. A living, flowing river hundreds of miles long, threaded with creeks and marshes and tidal flats. You cannot pour rotenone into the Potomac. You cannot drain it. The containment option was gone, and that is where the spending truly began. Because once the fish was in the river, the goal shifted from eradication to control. And control on a river that size is a bottomless pit of money. Here's where the human story turns and where the first mistake takes shape. We did what people do. We declared war. Maryland and Virginia wildlife agencies, working alongside federal partners, threw the full toolkit at the Potomac snakehead. They ran electrofishing surveys, sending current through the water to stun fish to the surface so they could be counted and removed. They encouraged anglers to kill every snakehead they caught and never throw one back, even running it as a rule of law. They promoted snakehead fishing tournaments. They built a whole public campaign around eating the invader, marketing its firm white flesh to restaurants, turning the frankenfish into a menu item as a way to fish it down. And to be fair, there was logic in all of it. If you can't poison a river, you can at least try to pull the predator out faster than it breeds, but the snakehead breeds very, very fast. And here is the catastrophic miscalculation hiding inside all that effort. The strategy assumed that human removal was the main thing standing between the river and a snakehead explosion. It assumed that if we stopped fishing them, stopped electrofishing, stopped the tournaments, the population would rocket upward unchecked because there was nothing else out there to hold it down. That assumption is the $500 million mistake because it treated the river as empty, as if the Potomac were a bare tank waiting to be overrun and we were the only line of defense. If this way of seeing rivers and resilience and the hidden intelligence of intact ecosystems speaks to you, I've gone much deeper into it in my book Wild Return, also titled Rewild Deeper and Rewild, where I trace the full arc of stories like this one, the moments when nature quietly outperforms the plans we made for it. It's available through the link in the description, and if the Potomac story unsettled something in you, I think you'll find the book does the same. Worth a look before we go any further. The Potomac was not empty. It was a functioning ecosystem with its own predators, its own pressures, its own brutal arithmetic of who eats whom. And those native predators were already, from the very first spawning season, doing the one thing nobody had built into the budget. They were eating the babies. Let me be precise, because this is the heart of it. The terror of the snakehead was always built on those tens of thousands of eggs. But a fish that lays 50,000 eggs is not planning for 50,000 adults. In nature, that enormous number is a bet against slaughter. The female produces so many because she expects almost all of them to be eaten. That is the entire strategy. Overwhelm the predators with sheer volume and hope a handful slip through. So, the only question that ever really mattered was this. In the Potomac, who would eat the young snakeheads? And would they eat enough? For years, that question went mostly unasked, because everyone was too busy fighting the adults. The adult snakehead is the dramatic one. It's the one that bites the line, the one that makes the photograph, the one that walks across the lawn in the local news segment. So that's where the attention went, and the money with it. The answer was downstream of all that noise. In the stomachs of fish, nobody was filming. Now, watch what the river was doing while we spent. The two fish that quietly broke the snakehead's back are not exotic. They are not rare. They are about as American as a freshwater fish gets. The first is the largemouth bass, Microterus salmoides, the most popular game fish in the United States. The fish that built an entire industry of bass boats and tournaments and tackle, a native, aggressive, ambush predator that already lived in exactly the same warm, weedy, slow-moving Potomac backwaters the snakehead chose to spawn in. The second is the northern snakehead's quiet executioner from the deep, the catfish. The big bottom-feeding catfish of the Potomac system, the blue and flathead catfish, predators that grow enormous, hunt by scent and feel, and will swallow nearly anything that fits in their mouths, including a young snakehead that strays too far from its parent's guard. Here's the thing about the snakehead's famous parental defense. It is real and it is fierce, but it has a hard limit. Two parents can guard a tight ball of fry for a while. They cannot guard each individual young fish once that ball begins to spread out and the juveniles start to hunt on their own. The moment those young snakeheads disperse, they become exactly what every small fish in the river is: food. And the Potomac is full of mouths. Largemouth bass slashing through the shallows, catfish patrolling the bottom, the very same shallow, vegetated habitat that makes a perfect snakehead nursery is also the favorite hunting ground of the largemouth bass. The two fish overlap almost completely. They want the same water. They eat the same prey. And the base, already there in huge numbers, simply added baby snakehead to the menu. When researchers finally started cutting open stomachs and running the diet studies, the picture that emerged was not the picture from the headlines. Native predators in the Potomac and its connected waters were eating juvenile snakeheads. The young invader, for all its parents' ferocity, was being cropped down by the resident predators year after year, the same way those predators crop down every other species that spawns in that river. And now the part that should have changed the whole conversation, the largemouth bass, the fish everyone assumed the snakehead would wipe out, did not collapse. Surveys of the Potomac's base population through the years of the snakehead spread did not show the crash that was predicted. The base held. In many stretches, they kept right on thriving, side by side with the invader that was supposed to erase them. Sit with that. The doomsday scenario had the snakehead exploding unchecked and eating the native fishery into oblivion. What the long-term electrofishing data actually showed was two predators reaching a rough, grinding standoff. The snakehead established itself, yes. It became a permanent resident, yes. But it did not detonate. It did not empty the river. The base population, the single best measure of whether the Potomac's predatory food web was being destroyed, stayed remarkably stable. Two fish, doing for nothing what we spent a fortune chasing. The base eating the young from the weeds. The catfish taking them from the bottom. No budget, no boats, no tournaments. Just the ordinary, relentless machinery of a river that already knew how to handle a predator. But I told you, the tension keeps climbing, and it does. Because once you see that the native fish were doing the work, a far more uncomfortable question opens up. If the river was containing the snakehead on its own, what exactly were we paying for? Let me agitate that, because it deserves it. $520 million is the figure that gets attached to the broader fight against snakeheads and invasive fish in these systems. And whatever the exact accounting, the scale of the effort is not in dispute. Years of electrofishing surveys, staff salaries, boats and fuel and equipment, bounty and tournament programs, public awareness campaigns, research, removal crews working stretch after stretch of river, pulling out adult snakeheads one by one. And here is the brutal irony buried in the diet data. The thing we were doing, removing the big adult snakeheads, may have mattered far less than the thing the river was doing on its own, removing the juveniles by the thousands. Think about the arithmetic. Pull one adult snakehead out of the Potomac and you have removed one fish. A real win, but a small one. Meanwhile, a single nest that gets found by foraging bass and catfish can lose hundreds or thousands of young in a season. The native predators were operating at the scale of the eggs, the only scale that ever actually mattered for population control. We were operating at the scale of the adults, the scale that makes the best photographs and the worst dent. I am not telling you the human effort was worthless. Early detection mattered. The Crofton poisoning, brutal as it was, may genuinely have bought time. Monitoring told us where the fish were going. Public education stopped people from dumping live snakeheads into new ponds, which is exactly how these invasions start, and how they spread to new watersheds where the native predators haven't yet learned the menu. That part was real and important. But the central promise, the idea that our nets and our current and our tournaments were the wall holding back the flood, does not survive contact with the survey data. The wall was already there. It had fins. It had been patrolling that river since long before anyone had ever heard the word snakehead. And this is where it gets genuinely hard to look at, because the same agencies that spent the money also spent something harder to measure: attention, public fear. The sense, repeated in headline after headline, that the Potomac was on the edge of catastrophe and only constant, costly human intervention stood between order and ruin. That story made the river feel fragile. It made nature feel like a patient on life support that we, the doctors, had to keep alive with endless treatment. The data tells a different story. The data says the patient was healthier than we thought, and a good deal of our treatment was aimed at a disease the body was already fighting off. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is where these stories get oversold, and I won't do that to you. The snakehead was not defeated. Let me say that plainly. It is still in the Potomac. It is still in the Chesapeake tributaries. It has spread to other states, including waters where it absolutely should not be. Almost always, because a human moved it there. In some isolated systems with few large native predators, a snakehead introduction can still do real damage. The native fish of the Potomac did not eradicate the invader, and they were never going to. What they did was contain it. They turned what could have been an explosion into a coexistence. They held the line at a level the river could absorb, without a single dollar of funding, without a strategy meeting, without anyone deciding it should be so. They did it the way every stable ecosystem does it, by being full. A river crowded with hungry, established predators is a hard place for a newcomer to take over, no matter how many eggs that newcomer lays, because every one of those young fish has to run a gauntlet of mouths that were there first. That is the real lesson, and it is bigger than one fish. The most powerful tool against an invader is very often a healthy, native predator community that is already in place. Not chemicals, not bounties, not $500 million of removal. A functioning food web that treats the invader's young as just one more thing to eat. And here's the open loop I want to leave running for a moment before I close it. If that's true, then the most important conservation work isn't the dramatic war we wage after an invader arrives. It's the quiet, unglamorous job of keeping the native predators abundant and the habitat intact before the invader ever shows up. Because the river that's full of bass and catfish absorbs the blow. The river we've already emptied, through pollution and overfishing and dams, is the one that gets overrun. Step back and look at the whole shape of it. 2002, a snakehead in a Maryland pond, and a crew poisoning everything that lived in it. 2004, the fish in the Potomac, and containment off the table. Then, years of war. Electrofishing, tournaments, bounties, A fish branded the Frankenfish in the press, a predator that breathes air and walks on land and guards tens of thousands of young, a containment campaign whose total cost across these efforts has been put in the range of $520 million. And the whole time, the answer was already swimming. The largemouth bass in the weeds, the catfish on the bottom, native predators eating young snakeheads by the thousands, holding the population to a level the river could carry, while the base population that everyone swore would collapse simply refused to. The doomsday curve flattened into a standoff. The horror story became a coexistence. And the bill for the part that may have mattered least kept climbing. We didn't conquer the snakehead, we never could. What actually saved the Potomac is that we returned to a truth we keep forgetting and keep paying for. A whole, healthy river already knows how to defend itself. The predators that belonged there did the work for free, at the only scale that counted, while we fought the dramatic, expensive, visible version of the same fight upstream. We didn't tame the river, we just finally noticed it had never stopped doing its own job. So I'll leave you with the question I can't shake. If two ordinary native fish quietly did, for nothing, what $500 million set out to do, then how much of what we call managing nature is really just standing in front of it, taking credit, and sending ourselves the invoice? Is that a wonder, or is it a warning? If you found this as remarkable as I do, let me know in the comments. I want to hear it straight. Do you think the money spent fighting the snakehead was wasted, or do you think the monitoring and early detection were worth every dollar, even if the fish themselves did the heavy lifting? I read these, and the best arguments come from you. If this changed how you think about invasive species, about that whole reflex to grab the poison and declare war, share it with someone who'd appreciate it, someone who fishes, someone who still believes the only way to fight nature's problems is to spend our way through them. And subscribe, because there are more of these comeback stories than you'd believe. Rivers and forests and coastlines that healed in ways nobody planned and nobody predicted, and I've got plenty more to tell you. I'm Edmund Hale, thanks for watching. 3 title options. 1. America spent 520 million fighting snakeheads. 2. Native fish did it for free. 2. The $520 million mistake. How 2 ordinary fish beat America's most feared invader. 3. They called it the Frankenfish. 2 native fish quietly ended the panic for nothing. Thumbnail concept: before, after, split image. Left side, dark and tense, a snarling open-mouthed snakehead with a bold red overlay reading $520 million. Right side, bright and clear, a largemouth bass and a catfish side by side with a green overlay reading $0 and a small check mark. A jagged crack down the center divides the 2 halves. Word count: approximately 3,940 spoken words. There's one more thread I owe you, because it deepens everything I just said. When biologists finally sat down with the long-term Potomac surveys, they noticed something almost no one had wanted to say out loud. The young snakeheads weren't just being eaten, they were being outcompeted. In those warm, weedy backwaters, the larval and juvenile snakeheads were fighting the same battle for food that every young fish fights, and they were fighting it against bass fry and sunfish and a dense, established crowd of natives that had a head start measured in millennia. That matters more than it sounds. A predator that arrives in an empty room takes the room. A predator that arrives in a packed room has to claw for every meal, dodge every larger mouth, and survive a childhood spent surrounded by things that want to eat it. The Potomac was a packed room, and a packed room is the cheapest, most durable defense a river can have. So consider what that asks of us. It says, the work isn't the war, the work is the room. Keep the water clean. Keep the predators abundant. Keep the marsh grass thick and the food web full. And you build a place that quietly refuses invaders without anyone firing a shot or signing a check. That's not a strategy you can put on a press release. It doesn't photograph well, but it is, by a wide margin, the one that actually worked. If you're still here with me, you're exactly who I made this next part for. Right where I stopped is where it gets good. The predator-prey data behind the river's recovery. That waits inside the Rewilding Circle. In there, you can ask me your own questions, and I answer you myself. A real person, not a machine. And you won't be alone. Nature lovers like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. And if it's not for you, cancel anytime with one click. Now, if those snakeheads surprised you, wait until you see what happened with zebra mussels. America poured in billions, yet 3 quiet native species did far more. That story starts right here.